It's a tale as old as time, or time travel, at least. A warrior from the future is sent back to the moment that everything went wrong to try to save what they can and avert whatever horrors lay waiting further on down the timeline. It's such a familiar setup that once the time travel subgenre is established, the audience already knows most of the plot beats in advance. I'm particularly fond of how the movie Looper handles it, where the older protagonist tells his younger self, "I don't want to talk about time travel because if we start talking about it, then we're going to be here all day talking about it, making diagrams with straws." The how doesn't really matter. The setup is always more or less a riff on the same old story. It's only in the characters and how they handle it that differs, the tone of the story, the way it ends. Cronos the New Dawn wastes no time making diagrams with straws. It wastes no effort on trying to reinvent the structure of a time travel story. It focuses instead on subverting those expectations at every turn, using familiarity and genre foreknowledge that a player will go into the game with against them, taking the familiar and corrupting it into something grand, gothic, and fresh. You are, the Traveler, sent back into 2 layers of the past by a mysterious organization known as the Collective. You begin with almost no exposition or understanding of the plot. You awaken inside your bulky dive suit in a strange capsule that calibrates you with a series of extremely cryptic word association questions, along with some Rorschach images. You must shoot your way out of the pod, and on the other side is a world covered entirely in fog and ruin. It is as truly bleakly dead as dead can be. Most post-apocalyptic settings have some kind of element of hope, new societies, however brutal they might be, or a revitalization of nature in the absence of people, some form of renewal that helps thematically counterbalance the death and destruction. Cronos doesn't have any of that. This world is terminal. Not only is it full of monsters, but reality itself is coming apart at the seams that you rip open even further as a time traveler. Your mission from the Collective is to try and archive the essences of those who died in the Cataclysm, which took place in Poland during the 1980s. What the essences are, and what the Collective wants with them, are left deliberately murky and unclear for long periods of the game, and rarely will Cronos come right out and say something explicitly about it. The narrative is a puzzle, and piecing it together is the game's highest satisfaction. But that happens slowly. In the moment-to-moment of play, Cronos is an extremely competent and well-paced survival horror game that is absolutely masterful at using the conventions and structures of the genre to keep tension as high as possible. There is hardly a moment in this game where you are safe or comfortable. Any lead that you have can be disintegrated in a matter of moments by an ambush or assault that will drain your resources down to the bone. Empowerment inevitably leads to disempowerment as the encounter design accelerates along its difficulty curve. And this is a game that begins in a very difficult place. I was killed by the very first monster, much tougher and meaner than I ever expected from a tutorial event. But it's a lesson that's important to impart as soon as possible. This world will fucking kill you. You are not strong in comparison to what opposes you. You are fragile, you are small, you are a dot of life adrift in an ocean of entropic death. There is a meanness to it that I was at first worried about because I'm not usually very good at these sorts of games and tend to struggle with them, but the cruelty of it is so thematically resonant and such an inseparable part of the storytelling that I came to really embrace it, and eventually to kind of love it. I don't like games that are hard just for the challenge of it. I am not motivated by winning at all. But I do love horror. I love the emotions of it, the mood, the atmosphere. So this is not an arbitrary cruelty. It is a cruelty with a singular intention. It is a game designed to evoke dread in every moment. And every moment of the game, I felt that dread, cold and pure and evil. The initial hook is the mysterious nature of the protagonist and the enemies, set against this backdrop of more recognizable destruction. The world before it fell was something familiar. Everything that came after is intriguingly bizarre. You are Traveler ND3576. Your participation in the time travel scheme seems more like a religion or secret society than a job. There's an attitude of fatalism to it where every obstacle is met with a resigned recitation of "such is our calling." You come across the logs of many other fallen travelers, and all of them share that kind of resigned fatalism. They are all single-mindedly focused on the objective, devoid of passion, but full of guile. The monsters are called orphans. The disease that created them is called the Change. Now, this video is marked spoilers, but I want to reiterate for a moment because the narrative hinges a lot of its weight and power on the not knowing. It's a game where it's best to go in blind and learn all you can at the pace that it's given. Even starting to ask the questions, let alone explore the answers, short-circuits things a little bit. So if you have any interest in the game, just play the damn thing. It's excellent. I'm going to crack it all open a bit, so consider yourself warned. The first question is the one that cracks it all open the most anyway. If these monsters are orphans, what are they orphaned from? Well, the tagline for the game is "Don't let them merge," which is supposed to be the marquee mechanic making the game different from other survival horror titles. Dead monsters must be destroyed with fire, a la Resident Evil or The Evil Within, or they will be used as fuel for other monsters who will absorb their abilities or mass and become stronger in some significant way. I was honestly more worried about the mechanic earlier in the game than I was later on because this merging process takes a couple seconds and can be easily interrupted. Dead ones don't come back on their own, so if you clear an area, the only danger is if you have to backtrack and new monsters are introduced. Fire is most useful as a stun delay tactic. It will halt even the biggest monsters in their tracks to use your flamethrower, or the incendiary proximity mines called pyres. The merging definitely adds tension to the larger combat encounters later in the game, and I definitely have gotten my shit rocked by an unexpected merge, but it is not a combat mechanic that actually dominates the gameplay. It is just a way of adding flavor to the otherwise genre-standard survival horror. It's really more important to the plot. The change is a disease of sorts that composites people physically and mentally into a terrible, fleshy amalgamation. It's very much like The Thing, but without the singular intelligence. It's more diffuse and confused, something that was not meant to be, but is anyway. So if things keep getting worse, if things keep merging and merging and merging, what do you end up with? Some kind of hive mind with a vague memory of being human. Something that remembers the science of human civilization, but not the experience of it. Not what it was like to be an individual with hopes and dreams, just a mash of memory and death and shadow. No singular creature. Some kind of, collective. This is the pipeline of your actual quest. There are those who never fully merged with the hive mind, lost souls whose memory and experience the hive mind lacks. Orphaned from the whole. Some of those who never made it into the collective have important knowledge regarding how the whole thing happened in the first place, how the collective came to be. To do this, you have to pass through time in two layers. From the strange, unseen, and mostly unknown future of the collective, you come back to the primary insertion point of the timeline where reality is weak. From there, you can pry open anomalies and dive into them, hence the antique dive suit look, and go back to 1980s Poland where the events are still happening. I love the way Cronos slowly reveals the monstrous dimensions of your task, because at first it seems like you're going back in time to save these people, fix things, make it better somehow. When you finally arrive at your first target, you are at odds about this. He wants you to fix things, make them better, save his girlfriend, but you insist that her fate is fixed and cannot be altered. There is no desire there to save anyone, not even Edward, just to archive him, harvest him before he is lost in a less productive manner. When you slide out your essence extractor, it is immediately clear that whatever you do to Edward is going to be painful and fatal. You are more monster than hero, but the lines between the two become beautifully blurred over the course of the story. The game really hits its stride after that first essence extraction. The plot thickens in fascinating ways, the level design becomes more creative and brutal, the challenge dials up to a remarkably aggressive level. You need to hook up to a strange high-tech device to allow the essence to undergo ascendance. The melding of science fiction concepts with religious language is quite deliberate because it becomes clear that what you've extracted is the functional equivalent of someone's soul. They are lost, frightened, and you are condemning them to some kind of surreal technological hell. In practical sense, you are interrogating the essences for clues about where to go next and what to do, but the power of these scenes is very much in what is left unsaid, what is implied, the despair and dissolution of the self that these characters are undergoing because of your interference. The implied cruelty of it is fascinating. It is very daring to characterize the protagonist this way, to make the player doubt what they're doing and hold it in some degree of contempt. After doing this to Edward, you're introduced to the only other traveler left alive in your timeline, the warden. He is shocked to see you pursuing this quest. He had assumed that the time for that was long past. He is willing to help you, but he is oddly hesitant about it. Getting to know the warden is one of my favorite parts of the game. The Ascendance machine is the center of the game's world hub, and all the chapters redirect back to it once they're completed, at which point your relationship with the warden will progress, and he is willing to spill more secrets in his melancholy, cryptic way. His audio logs are even darker. These are secrets he did not intend to share, where he talks about losing his mind, being unable to die, about rejecting the collective. He envies the humans. He obsesses over them. He wants to emulate them. He wants to be counted among them, but never can. In the game's best scene, the Traveler and the Warden talk in his room full of art and artifacts of the gone-away world, where he plays the piano and tries desperately to get the Traveler to appreciate the emotion of it. Where you have been dispassionately pursuing the calling, he has been embracing passion itself, though it is clear that this has not really been doing him any favors. They talk about the expression of the self in the face of mortality and dwindling time, and how that is what makes humans what they are. The Warden saying specifically, quote, "In the perspective of perpetuity, what isn't but a trivial thing? What's the endless existence worth deprived of even a moment of introspection or unadulterated joy? For some reason, people listened to music once, went to the theater, played games, and told each other stories. These things are not crucial to survival, and yet without them there would be no humanity." End quote. This is what makes Cronos such an incredibly good horror story, because it is bleak, it is hopeless, but it is also explicitly humanist. It is celebratory of what people are by presenting a world where all of that which made us special has been utterly destroyed. In terms of genre, this is about as classic as you get for gothic storytelling. High gothic, Mary Shelley shit, two monsters discussing what it means to be human by the dim light of old bulbs and the pattering of sad notes on a piano. Video games often lean into modern storytelling devices so hard that to revisit something foundational and antiquated like this can ironically feel like a breath of fresh air. The Warden becomes so deeply frustrated with the Traveler for not being able or willing to understand. Which is the more meaningless pursuit? The calling, which will not alter fate, which will not save anyone, or all of this trivial nonsense, this art, this music, these paintings, these memories covered in blood and dust? I love that the Warden mentions games specifically because it puts Cronos as a whole within this context of storytelling as a way to affirm our own humanity. By playing this game, by engaging with the meaning of it and not just the objectives, you are participating in the very legacy that separates you from the monsters. This timeline is absolutely fucking toast. But for others, maybe not quite yet. And also not for cats, apparently. All over the game are hidden cats who will somehow yield up a useful item and then come to stay with you at the hub area. The Traveler and the Warden even discuss the cat situation, both of them hopelessly smitten with kittens, which is another very endearing layer. Cats are a source of joy, even at the end of all things. Conversations with the Warden are also the primary source of all the deep lore in the game, all the relatively concrete explanations that there are to be found. I actually missed what was arguably the most important conversation my first time around, because he was standing in a place he had been before, and I assumed the questions and answers would be the same set. On New Game Plus, I went up to him anyway, and lo and behold, here were all the answers about the orphans and the collective and everything that I had thought was mostly implied, being explicitly and directly explained. I've seen posts from people claiming not to know what happened in this game or why, and I can see how that might happen because some details can be blown past quite accidentally, but in terms of what information is actually being made available, the whole thing is well explained and makes as much sense as a time travel story ever really can. Embracing the fact that these sorts of stories can never really square up perfectly is part of the fun of this game and of the media that came before it and influenced it. In an IGN interview with the director-producer Jacek Zeba and co-director-designer Wojciech Pieko, the interviewer asks, quote, "What are your other inspirations? Fans are comparing it to Dead Space and also saying lots of classic survival horror like Silent Hill in it too," end quote. Zeba says, quote, "Definitely Dead Space is there because of the protagonist and stuff. Just like Dead Space has the cut-off-the-limbs mechanic, we also have something that we will share later. Also like Alan Wake with the flashlight. Besides those, Japanese survival horror, like the Resident Evil series, the old ones, the remakes, those were a very, very big inspiration for us," end quote. Then Pieko adds, quote, "In terms of movies, films like 12 Monkeys. Our biggest film or TV series inspiration is Dark, the TV series by Netflix. It tells a story about time travel and a fictional German town, so a very European thing. We thought the same. Okay, we can set the game in Poland. We can also use time travel. This showed us that we can do it and people will be interested in it. We don't need to make the game about somewhere else. Let's show culture. Let's show Poland. Oh, and the thing, end quote. This is kind of funny to me particularly because it's like 12 Monkeys crossed with the thing is exactly how I described the game to my wife. It wears these influences very much on its sleeve, although it is not consumed by them and manages to stay very much its own thing. Bloober Team is most famous for its recent work on the Silent Hill 2 remake, but I haven't played that because I wanted to play the originals first. The only game of theirs I have played was the Blair Witch game they did, which was a very mixed bag. I wasn't sure what to expect from Cronos, but it so wildly exceeded what expectations I did have. Having done so many adaptations, I suppose it isn't surprising that there is a strong element of pastiche in this original work from Bloober Team. What allows it to transcend those influences and stand on its own is how deftly it chooses what to borrow. From the thing, we have the creature design, of course, but also the role of fire in the combat loop as a curative for the merging process and a way to significantly block or delay an attack. From Resident Evil, it pulls its mechanical rhythm, its ammunition economy, and the pacing of its encounters. This is where the principal difficulty comes from because, like Resident Evil, a player is rarely ever at a comfortable amount of inventory. Each encounter is a drain on what the player has that makes them weaker for the next encounter, driving the exploration motive, which of course is then more tense because it's hard to predict if you have enough to survive what you might discover while exploring. This is common to all survival horror games, more or less, but Cronos feels most rhythmically similar to Resident Evil 1 through 3. Every enemy is dangerous, extremely lethal. Once the player is used to taking them down singly and has a few upgrades under their belt, the game starts throwing the weaker enemies at you in increasingly large groups, which can become chaotic and dangerous if they begin to merge. Resident Evil 4 and beyond are more action-oriented experiences in combat loops. There is tension, but you are meant to tackle what you find. With Cronos and those earlier Resident Evil titles, the margin between defending yourself and running out of ammo and becoming defenseless is razor thin. There only ever feels like just enough to keep going, with limited inventory space requiring major trade-offs between what you take and what you leave behind, or else backtracking to a safe room to drop off the surplus. There were times where I did build up a little surplus in the safe room locker, but by the end of the game I had largely drained them out again. There was always something that pressed me to the point where I would either have to dip into the savings or die. The Dead Space influence is most obvious visually, but least impactful, really. Except for higher difficulties, Dead Space is not quite so stingy and cruel with its ammunition. But like Dead Space, killing enemies while almost out of resources will usually prompt those resources to drop. The game does not want players to become soft-locked and will take pains to prevent it. But what you have is often not quite enough. You have to use fire and explosive barrels and environmental opportunities to try and stretch those resources out. With Dead Space, the combat was more frequent, the encounters longer, and more populated. Cronos doesn't hit that stride until towards the end of the game, and it's pretty decent at preparing a player for it when it does happen. Anytime Cronos actually hands you ammunition, you can rest assured it's because you're about to get ground down into paste by the game. What it mainly takes from Dead Space is the physicality of the protagonist, the heavy footfalls, the slow gait, the feeling of being heavily armored, but not nearly armored enough. It's even got the stomp action, although brawling with the orphans is so dangerous and so generally ineffectual that I didn't engage with that mechanic much. The really funny thing about Cronos is that the influence that seems to have made the biggest impact, that can be felt the most strongly, is the 1995 Terry Gilliam film 12 Monkeys. Starring Bruce Willis, it shows a world ravaged by a disease where the only people who can go outside of underground bunkers have to wear these protective suits, the world above crumbling into gray nothingness, while everything down below is rusting into dystopian decay. The underground dwellers send prisoners back through a time travel device to try and better understand the nature of the disease, which you may recognize as being broadly equivalent to the setup of Cronos. It isn't just the setup, though. Cronos adapts most of the themes that 12 Monkeys is working with as well. One of the main characters of the movie is a psychiatrist and is at one point giving a lecture on people who have what she thinks are time travel delusions, citing something called the Cassandra complex. This is in reference to Greek myth where a woman is given the ability to see the future by Apollo, but rejects his sexual advances, so he curses her out of spite so that no one will ever believe her. The doctor sums it up as, quote, "the agony of foreknowledge combined with the impotence to do anything about it," end quote. The entire plot of Cronos revolves around exactly this. It is a loop. The traveler, the warden, the victims, and the monsters. Part of why reality is degrading in this timeline is because the loop has happened so many times already. In 12 Monkeys, the entire plotline is following a red herring. All evidence points to an army of the 12 Monkeys being responsible, but the army is just a bunch of animal rights activists being led by a deranged trust fund kid, played by Brad Pitt in the most annoying way possible. That time travel loop keeps going round and round because the villain, the actual responsible party, flies under the radar compared to the people making the most noise. With Cronos, it's the same. The loop is not being perpetuated by the monsters, the obvious villains. The world is being ruined the most by those who are attempting to actually help. The drama of 12 Monkeys is anchored by a love story, a romantic obsession that dooms the main characters as the love blossoms. Cronos doesn't have a love story, exactly. But only because love is a two-sided thing. At the heart of all the bleak misery you see and the instigation for the game's final boss fight is a romantic obsession gone horribly awry. The traveler crosses paths over and over again with a scientist named Veronica, a brave woman doing her best to save those that she can. At first, she opposes you, rightly identifying you as a threat. But when she becomes trapped in an elevator in a hospital during the game's best level, she has no choice but to work with you. The dynamic you develop is interesting, paranoid, distrustful, but there's also a curiosity there and a strange, uncanny familiarity. Previously in the Steelworks, you learned that Veronica was conscripted by the government to research a mysterious being they had captured and imprisoned, one of the travelers, one of the very first, called a Pathfinder. The Pathfinder began to trust her, open up to her, and ultimately would not speak to anyone besides Veronica. The foreshadowing done in the Steelworks is incredibly effective. You even see the weapon used against you in the climax as a blueprint on the wall. When you tell the warden about the Pathfinder, he becomes cagey. He lies smoothly, but not so smoothly that the player can't pick up on it. For the very last objective, you aren't pursuing a human target, you set out without orders from the collective to find the Pathfinder. And find him you do, the dead body of the warden, where Veronica and another scientist had conspired to hide him from the authorities. This leads to the revelation of his secrets. Not only are the Pathfinder and the warden one and the same, but the warden has been killing other travelers and dismantling them for parts so that he can keep himself alive, keep working towards his goal. His goal, of course, being you. As the Pathfinder, his last extraction assignment was Veronica. He could not bear to do it. She saw him as human, and this allowed him to see himself as human. He loved her with everything he had, and decided that he would do anything to protect her and save her. He could not stop the change, but he could perhaps spare one person. But it goes wrong in a way that he cannot quite remember. Veronica was infected, so he dismantled her, fused her with machinery, and used all the technology he had left to preserve scraps of her mind. He fused what was left of her essence with the memory core of one of the travelers that he harvested, breaking the Ascension machine in the process, but sending that composite being out into the future, which sent it promptly back again, as you, the you that begins the game. The way the ending is constructed is so wonderfully clever this way. There are two endings to choose from, but both are simultaneously true, because this is a loop. One or the other always gets chosen, starting the whole mess over. They are self-referential, so if ending A is chosen, it sets up a loop that takes several loops to come back around, and if ending B is chosen, then it goes right back to the beginning of this loop right away. Either way, there is no escape, just like how the main character of 12 Monkeys keeps dreaming the same dream, which turns out to be a memory of how, when he was a kid, right before the world died, he witnessed his own future self being gunned down in an airport. The agony of foreknowledge, the impotency to do anything about it. So let's break down the endings a bit. Either way, once you discover the Pathfinder's secret, Warden kills himself to resurrect the Pathfinder self, who immediately slices open reality to go after Veronica. At the top of the clock tower, seen in the opening, you meet up again with her, tell her that she is you and you are the same. But Pathfinder disagrees. You have disappointed him by pursuing your objectives, by serving the collective, by not being as human as the original Veronica. It's why he slams the lid down on the piano in that earlier scene. He wants you to be someone you can't be anymore because you have been altered. Which is his fault, but that knowledge just makes him angrier, more despairing. It's a little like how David betrays Dr. Shaw between Prometheus and Alien Covenant. He is obsessed with her, but that obsession is murderous, sick. He is not human and remakes her in the image that he wants and not the form she wishes to be, making her a monster to fill his own existential void. The Pathfinder fights you so he can try again and get it right this time. When you've finally beaten him down, Veronica pleads for the Pathfinder's life. She trusts him. She wants to help him. You can now choose, as the player, one of two things. In ending A, you disregard her wishes. You kill the Pathfinder so that you can be free, and so that she can be free. You tear open a hole in reality, but kill yourself in the process. The original Veronica returns to her timeline, but she is infected. She goes to Edward's apartment for safety, but in doing so spreads the disease that dooms the world. That basement where Edward was keeping some kind of secret, the earliest pockets of infection beyond the quarantine zone, that was a direct result of this choice. The player even experiences a brief flashback or flash forward of this when they leave Edward's apartment during the very first dive. You hear Veronica knocking at the door to get in. Your vision goes weird. It is always canonical that this happens. For ending B, you spare the Pathfinder. When the boss fight begins, the Pathfinder is in their older body, the armor still fresh. It is through your fight that it gets the damage that you see on the warden during all your conversations with him throughout the game. All those pitted impact scars, the missing arm, you do that in the climax. He takes Veronica and leaves through a time tear, thinking he will save her this time for sure. But the anomaly is unstable. He has to reboot himself from an archived version that does not remember the end of the game, and by the time he does reboot, Veronica is already being consumed by the change. He swears he will fix her. He swears this time he will get it right. This time. So this ending is also always canonically true. The warden does not remember you, but bears your scars anyway. The end has already transpired at the beginning, a true loop. And at the root of it all is the bitter irony that both of you are doing all of these things to save Veronica. You are both well-intentioned, and it all leads to nothing but death, agony, and misery, countless times over. The disease itself is beyond the scope of the loop. It was discovered under the Steelworks, and without it being discovered, the change would not begin. And if the change never begins, there is no collective. And if there is no collective, there is no Pathfinder and no travelers and no time travel at all. The paradox cannot resolve itself with a happy ending. There is no saving the world, and it was never your actual job in the first place. It's just that Veronica wished that it could be so, and so the traveler wishes it too. It's good to wish for a better world. Wishes just don't make a lot of difference when the past has destroyed your present and degraded your future, an immutable chain of consequence and reaction that binds the hands of all those trapped within it. There is one hope, however. If you go around the loop one more time in New Game Plus, an ending C becomes available, much like Alan Wake 2's final draft. While Alan Wake 2's revelation is that the time loop was actually a spiral all along, Cronos hinges on the idea that awareness of predestination allows for a chance to break it. In 12 Monkeys, it takes Cole too long to understand that his dream was a memory, and even when he does understand this, he is too in love to break it. But if that déjà vu had shook him stronger, if he could temper his choices with his foreknowledge, then a new path would present itself. I don't always bother with New Game Plus and survival horror, even though it's a game design feature that's pretty standard to the genre. With Cronos, though, I loved the game enough to take it from the top, and I was also deeply intrigued by the twist enough to want to see all the ways in which it recontextualized scenes I had already experienced. More than that, though, is that I wanted to play from a position of strength for once. There are far more weapons in the game than there are upgrades for them, and I wanted to play around with them a little. I was also curious about the hard mode that was unlocked. Is hard mode really harder if you go in with fully upgraded health, with weapons doing max damage? It took me 18 hours to get through the game the first time, and it took me 12 the second time because I didn't have to spend time fearful about where to go or what to do next. I knew what I was doing. I was ready. I would use foreknowledge as a weapon, stronger than any shotgun, but my shotgun was beefed up as hell on top of it, so what scrawny orphan was in a position to deny me? New Game Plus, for me, was an opportunity to really savor everything I had loved the first time, but been too fearful or struggling to slow down and appreciate fully. The level design and environmental art of Cronos really demands that a person do slow down and appreciate it. Reality breaking down at the seams and fraying apart is an opportunity to inject surrealist touches into the bleak devastation, not just gray and blue, but ominous yellows and oranges, broad brush echoes of the fires that you use in combat. The Steelworks is so impressive this way, and it's an actual place, too. All of what you see in Cronos is based on Nowa Huta, a Polish planned community built by the Soviet Union as a kind of propagandistic utopian model based on the concept of socialist realism. It sits on the outskirts of Krakow. This is kind of condensed within the game into the New Dawn art and branding that you see. The actual name, Noah Huta, means the new ironworks instead, and this building is the Vladimir Lenin Steelworks. First constructed in 1954, it grew year over year, and by 1974, it was the largest industrial building in the entire country. By the 1980s, when the game is set, the whole experiment was sputtering out and in decline. Within the game, the Steelworks as a level is beautifully designed as several wings pivoting around a central point with a safe room. There is a long lead-up to it which builds tension and helps establish the scale of the facility, how absolutely dominant it is over the whole cityscape. There's a secondary area that opens up later on that leverages its distance from the main safe room to make a player feel cut off in a hostile maze of dust and monsters. Setting the change during a period of decline instead of at the height of the town is a clever way to intensify the dread and despondency, because even when you travel back in time, things feel balanced on the edge of catastrophe. You aren't traveling to some golden age, you're traveling to a time where people were poor and suffering, but at least they were human, and that counts for a lot. During the beginning of the change, the military tried to quarantine the sick within the Steelworks, which leads to a wonderful set-piece battle like the makeshift infirmary in Hall B. There's hardly another area in the game more absolutely jam-packed with monsters, but some of the orphans are initially non-violent. They are passively suffering, trapped in some kind of malaise where they just sit and wait for an end which will not come for them. The Steelworks really is brilliant design for a survival horror level. Every new area is extremely hostile and challenging, but these areas are interconnected in a way that constantly loops back into areas that you've already cleared and made safe for the time being. Figuring out how they connect is a genuine joy, and there are quite a few optional rooms with rewards like upgrade cores hidden throughout. The hospital is another knockout level, for very similar reasons. The Steelworks has wings that are far-flung enough to necessitate additional safe rooms, but the hospital only has one. Every area radiates out from this central point, with everything locked behind doors whose keys structure the progression. Notably, the whole hospital level takes place in the past, during the fall. There is still the echo of gunfire in the halls as you advance through it, although the soldiers are always dead by the time you get to the noise. It switches the mood from post-apocalypse to present-tense apocalypse, which feels more oppressive, more raw. And there are interesting little moments like the morgue battle. In the morgue, you shift out of the timeline into something between worlds, a crack in time, and fight through several tough waves of enemies. It's like a deep puddle of broken time that you fall into and have to climb out of to continue, and there's no other moment like it in the game. It might end up being an important kind of detail if there are sequels set in the same universe, which Bloober Team has said that they are interested in. The hospital has more optional content than the Steelworks as well, including a whole wing that players don't have to do at all, which is extremely tough. The reason to do it anyway is to get a puzzle piece to unlock a special door in the safe room where a new kind of shotgun is hidden. The hospital is tighter in terms of level design, denser with enemies and exploration than the Steelworks. Creepier too, I think, but not as impressive visually. The Steelworks is where Cronos does its best work with color, with mood. The individual locations would not be nearly as remarkable, however, if they just stood alone. Equally important is the game's commitment to creating a sense of scale with long traversal segments. The game starts out without giving any kind of understanding about where it might be anchored. You go into the subway station where the hub area is located, but pass immediately through it, out the other side, and into the ruined streets and apartment buildings. Picking through the residential buildings is a major part of creating the atmosphere because there are no people anywhere, not anymore. It's not like Fallout or something where there are ruins to scavenge for the benefit of some neo-survivalist society elsewhere. These are husks, tombs, nowhere places for nobody. The longest traversal section is the lead up to the hospital, where you have to use the gravity boots you got from the Steelworks to navigate vast canyons that have opened up in the landscape, the earth torn open by time travel anomalies. It's an exhausting one-way journey through caves, over chasms, into labyrinthine apartments, up the walls of shattered high-rises. The hospital being so tightly condensed hits as well as it does because of the experiential contrast of this long, sprawling introductory sequence. It is a fucking odyssey to even get there. And also a chance to really get an impression of the city. In an interview with Source Gaming, lead writer Grzegorz Lita talked about the choice to set Cronos in a real place. Quote, "It's not about tourism or promoting the sights of Poland. We keep coming back to Poland because it has a fascinating history. We chose Noah Huta for the setting for this reason. It was created just after World War II when we were under Soviet influence. It was a dark and trying time for many in Poland, and we thought it would make sense as the setting for Cronos: The New Dawn, giving the themes and the message that we wanted to tackle. We wanted to tell stories about interesting characters and their relationships, and I think if you do that in a dark setting, then it becomes more interesting because the sparks of goodness and kindness shine so much brighter. In the real world, we overthrew Moscow's puppet government by uniting as a people and creating solidarity as a community. It was the people of Poland who kicked those motherfuckers out of Poland and back to Moscow. But during the occupation, the government introduced a martial law that forced everyone to stay in their homes. It was basically the OG lockdown. When it came to Cronos, we asked ourselves, what if getting together like this was the problem because of the merging and the virus? The result of this lockdown was the extinction of the human race. End quote. The collective is a particularly interesting element of the horror when seen through this parallel to Soviet totalitarianism, an entity that sees itself as utopian and inevitable but functionally exists to destroy any kind of individualism and any sense of community or history. It's not a matter of the work being simplistically pro-capitalist or anti-communist. Like Disco Elysium, it is a work that grapples with the legacy of Soviet control, all the damage caused by that regime, all the broken lives and shattered dreams. The Soviet Union hurt a lot of people. It failed its own ambitions. It poisoned its own revolution. It did indefensible things, and this is art that aligns its horror with the cultural memory of having those indefensible things done to people. In a different interview with Gaming Bible, community manager Lukas Kunecki said, quote, "Setting parts of the game in the 1980s, during communist repression, poverty, and systemic control, helps us reflect on how humans behave when their humanity is pushed to the limit. When is being part of a collective empowering, and when does it start to hurt? What happens when closeness comes at the cost of pain?" End quote. The Pathfinder as a villain is kind of a lens into the ambivalence this describes. He is not a hero for rejecting the collective. It was one step towards humanity, but then he overshot it and lost his humanity again by focusing myopically and obsessively on controlling Veronica's fate and not allowing her the agency that he loved her for in the first place. Closeness at the cost of pain. A particularly amazing way this is presented is through the fact that all the essences that you are damning through the extraction process are Veronica's friends. These are people twice damned. First through the pain of living through the apocalypse, and then, again, being torn from their bodies and having their souls stuffed into a dehumanizing machine. This is conveyed in some subtle ways, like how the Traveler is at first very resistant to touch, but as she continues to interact with her targets, she becomes more willing to reach out, reaching a kind of climax in the third ascension sequence. When you perform your first extraction on Edward, his girlfriend Angela is with him. You dismiss her as being of no consequence. Later, in the hospital, your target is Veronica's colleague, Dr. Zibbert. But Zibbert has already merged with those around him, including Angela, whose corrupted face hangs above him. In extracting Zibbert, you extract her too, and so dealing with her is the Traveler's only way to actually get information. But her demeanor has changed. Where the Traveler was cold and cruel to Edward, she is empathetic to Angela. She comforts her. She is human with her. The Warden Pathfinder is wrong about you. Veronica is still in there, reaching out through the corruption, just like Angela, just like what remains of Dr. Zibbert, and in this liminal hell, they all connect, ever so briefly, as the friends they once were. It is so wonderfully dark and sad. It's such an emotional core to all of the high-concept sci-fi horror. There are other side essences that have their own stories, too. There are 5 dead travelers to be found throughout the game that all have an essence in their phylactery from a different target than yours. One is corrupted beyond repair, with no personality or memory. Another is an artist and sculptor whose mechanical bonus I did not find impressive. And the other 3 are all members of the same family who became separated during the change and never knew each other's fates. You can reunite them in death. The mother is first, and she howls at you to find her lost child. Her son has a whole little side story in one of the subway stations. There was a containment failure in the phylactery of the Traveler who extracted him, and the kid took control of the Traveler's body. A child in the body of a monster, lost in the darkness of the ruined subway. His chalk drawings are all over the place, combined with audio logs to tell his strange story. It's also very emotionally affecting, deeply melancholy, appropriately bleak. His body is inside of a toy store, all lit up for a Christmas that never came. The father was a soldier and has a story that you can follow through audio logs about his experience with the change, defying orders, trying to keep his humanity two ways, and failing at both. Many players unite the family because there's an achievement for doing so, but there's also a strong narrative value in the task if you're paying attention to the smaller details along the way. Another dark touch with all of this is that you can only have 3 essences at a time, and if you choose to delete one, the soul will scream as it is torn apart into nothingness. I am so impressed by how the supernatural gothic is reinterpreted and grounded out in the science fiction elements. This kind of thing is one of my all-time favorite fusions of horror. So much so that in my own attempt at a long-form fiction project I've been trying to finish for a few years, I've been hitting a lot of the same notes. Oops, I guess. But that's the nature of storytelling. It is not always possible to come up with an idea that is completely unique. What you have to do is come up with a story that expresses familiar ideas in a way that is unique to you, and let that authenticity carry it. Cronos has a long list of obvious influences, but in the end, it is something gorgeously different, telling a story all its own, in a medium where that storytelling can shine the brightest by letting the player themselves assemble these clever details into its grand tapestry of suffering. The funny thing about mechanically difficult games with a strong narrative like this is that if I truly love the story, I'm willing to step far outside my comfort zone as a player. I used to absolutely fucking hate stealth games with a burning passion, but playing Dishonored and Alien Isolation got me to reassess my relationship with them, reorient how I felt about the difficulty, and meet the challenge on its own terms. I am, as a player, completely unmotivated by challenge as a singular or naked goal. I could not care less about beating something if it isn't part of a larger artistic framework. I was similarly surprised by Dark Souls and particularly Elden Ring. Those were games I never expected to love the way that I did, but I also did not know from the reputation they had how artistically beautiful they were, or how the difficulty was a narrative component. Cronos made me better at survival horror than I ever have been before, in a way that Resident Evil and Dead Space did not quite inspire. I've been trying to figure out why that is. With Resident Evil, I think part of it was the way that I played them, one after another, for something like 80 days straight. I did not want to be stumped by the difficulty. I wanted them to end so that I could move on to the next one. I loved Dead Space 1 and 2, but I was also intimidated by them and mired in them. The difficulty at the time was too much for me on the higher settings, and I did not want to repeat sequences so often. There was a disconnect between the friction the game wanted me to feel and my self-frustration for being unable to meet it at that level. I couldn't be scared and feel the horror of it, and feel frustrated with how ineffectual my efforts were at the same time. So for Dead Space, turning down the difficulty was instrumental for my immersion. Cronos, though, hooked me with its difficulty. I was worried at first, but as I got deeper into it, I came to love the razor's edge I was balanced on, never comfortable, always bruised. The difficulty is mitigated by the brutality of the combat. All the enemies hit hard, but so do you. Your weapons and your fire are just as murderous as they are. The satisfaction of landing headshots just never gets old in Cronos, even if it is a genre staple ever since the original Resident Evils. Cronos has a charged shot mechanic that adds a certain element of tension. You have to demonstrate a little bit of patience and resolve in the face of enemies with it, which adds a lot. The boss fights are well designed too. They take everything you've got, but they are fair in this way. There is always enough in the arena in terms of ammunition and destructible objects to get the job done, or to replenish a player afterwards. They are a break from the main survival rhythms that create action-first spikes in the difficulty. Most of the bosses are relatively simple, but the best is saved for almost last. Your search for the Pathfinder takes you to a church on the outskirts of town. This is a chance for the gothic impulse to really take the reins for a moment, presenting some extremely traditional horror tropes played relatively straight. Like there's even a horde combat challenge arena in a graveyard. I'm not sure how much more traditional you can get than that. That fight in particular is extremely fun, even more so on hard mode. On New Game Plus, hard is not much different than the standard difficulty the first time through, but you are more free to use your tools, and that freedom really lets the combat breathe. It's slightly less tense and, horrifying, but a second playthrough of the same loop was never going to feel as tense, the player's familiarity with the level design and the ambushes that are already working against the atmosphere. It makes things meatier so that your upgrades feel more justified. It makes things stronger to preserve their danger against your upgraded shell. And the boss fights are universally more difficult, which makes them more engaging in repetition. The best boss is Mother Eliza, a nun who brought people together in the Abbey even though everyone knew the dangers, even though they would all merge in some horrible way. They wanted the comfort of closeness, and that desire doomed them all. Eliza has preserved some sense of self despite all this, making her triply an orphan, cut off from the collective, corrupted from her humanity, divorced from the god she used to worship. She is not a lumbering monster like the others, but more of an environmental boss. She lurks in a corner and is only vulnerable as her pustules open up around different parts of the church. The horde mechanic continues as she infinitely spawns the lowest tier of enemies to harass you as you work. Because even the lowliest enemies are deadly, this is very fucking difficult, particularly the last pustule. On both my initial playthrough and the hard mode, I was left with hardly any ammunition and my very last sliver of health when I won. It was a thrill, a pure expression of that knife-edge balance between success and failure. Eliza's creature design is incredible, too, and her cutscene is just as sad as the rest of the game. She asks, "Is my father with you now?" which seems like it might refer to God, but she actually means Dr. Zippert, who may very well be with you inside your phylactery. She wants him to know that she is sorry, that she regrets wasting their time together. It's like the warden had said, it is the fleeting nature of time that gives human life meaning. Even as a dying monster, beyond the reach of time, her thoughts are on that life, what was done right, what was done wrong, her relationships and connections. That was when she mattered, not as this horrid thing. The most monstrous thing she did, to her mind, is to waste the time she had and waste the love she felt for her family. Going from this boss fight to the next is interesting because it makes perfect narrative sense, but not a lot of mechanical sense. These themes are strongly reflected in the Warden Pathfinder's doomed quest to save Veronica, but the Pathfinder is not an especially monstrous enemy in comparison to Mother Eliza. He is just a guy. Well, a monster in a dive suit that thinks he's a guy, but still. The fight relies on timing in a way that none of the other fights quite do. There are 4 stages, and in each he becomes increasingly mobile, fading out when you begin to attack and fading back in for his own counters to your attacks. There's a lot of running away involved, figuring out when it's safe to strike, when it's dangerous. He takes so much damage to go down, but it is not insurmountable. It took me 3 tries on my first playthrough, and on hard mode I managed to nail his ass the first time, although it was very close. Astoundingly, I did not die once on hard mode, which might be a first in my entire professional career as a game critic. Something about Cronos just clicked for me in my brain. I found it so mechanically legible, so clear in what it was asking me to do, and in my options for doing it. Coupled with how completely I loved the narrative, Cronos has become one of my favorite horror titles of all time, which I certainly didn't expect going in. I thought I was getting a Dead Space knockoff and would have been perfectly satisfied if that's all it delivered on. But instead I got this gothic humanist tale about love, obsession, and art. A New Game Plus, the Traveler realizes what Veronica will say before she says it. She recognizes the trap. So does the Pathfinder once that seal is broken. The tragedy of endings A and B are that the Pathfinder and the Traveler do not actually want different things. They both want to save Veronica. They want her to change things. They want the collective stopped. The Pathfinder realizes that if he truly does love her, he has to let her go, here in Ending C anyway. He has to let her find her own way, both Veronicas. So they flee into a future outside the loop, with a teaser scene that suggests a new adventure. And there is plenty more room in the setting for something new. The collective is still an active villain, and there are many unexplored threads. For example, the Warden mentions entire classes of Traveler who do not appear in the game, like the Leviathans. The Leviathan suit is unlocked as a skin in the game after you beat it the first time, but what the Leviathans actually do is left unsaid. The change happens no matter what, even if Veronica escapes the loop. There is a lot of potential here for more, but in the meantime, what there already is functions perfectly on its own. It is a beautifully self-contained story. It executes on all of its themes. It lands all its beats. It even makes pretty good sense for a time travel story without anyone sitting around making diagrams with straws. Like all traditional Gothic horror, it is art about monsters who reflect what it is to be human. Through their misunderstandings and failures, we see our own ambitions, our own fragility. Traveler ND3576 is a mess of confusing meat stuffed into a suit who dreams that she was once human, and in dreaming, rediscovers what that means. Frankly, aren't we all? Thanks for watching.
place is highly perilous. Even for you. We'll need a bigger cap room.